Well, good morning. It's lovely to welcome you to the Saturday conversation. And as usual in this, I've got a guest. Now, you might recognise this person. You might think, where do I know her from? And if you think back, you might have spotted her from the television. So it's welcome to Debbie Thrower. Debbie has been a broadcast media journalist for a long time and was on our screens both with the BBC and with ITV. So now you might be thinking, well, how does Mark know Debbie? Well, we both trained to be what were then called readers and are now called licensed lay ministers together. And at the time, pre-COVID, we used to go off on weekend residentials. And as part of those residentials, I met Debbie. And I'm going to tell you one little story before I introduce her. So the first time we properly met, we'd had somebody come to do something with us who was a bit of an extrovert. And as some of you know, I'm not very keen on extrovert activities. And I wasn't feeling very happy about this activity. And it happened that Debbie and I got paired up together to do this. And I was looking even more grumpy than I often do. And we got to the point where we were going to start this activity. And Debbie said, we're not going to do the activity. You're going to tell me why you're so grumpy this morning. And it could have killed the friendship straight away. But actually, a few minutes later, I was a lot happier and we became firm friends and have been since. And since then, Debbie has gone on to do something really, really interesting locally, which some of you will know a little bit about. And that's what we're going to talk about today, which is Ana Chaplaincy. So I'm going to say to Debbie, if there's anything else she wants to say as an introduction, then please do, Debbie. And then once you've done that, if you want to, I was going to ask you if you could give us a bit of a summary of what Ana Chaplaincy is and what it exists for.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. You're absolutely accurate in your memories and they tally with my memory of it too. And it's lovely to see you, Mark, again, and to have this chance to tell you about something that started locally, but that is now developing nationally.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, what's it all about? I guess that's the main question, isn't it?
Well, the full title is Ana Chaplaincy for Older People. We don't say the elderly anymore, just as it's not PC to say the disabled or whatever. And it really, in a nutshell, is spiritual care for older people, for all older people, whether they're people of strong faith, little faith, or no faith at all. And it's community-based, and it absolutely is about going to where older people are living. So they may be in care homes, they may be in sheltered accommodation complexes, or living independently. We do go and visit people one-to-one, at least we did until COVID-19 intervened. So we might talk a bit about that later on. But it's ecumenical. It started with a tie-up between Anglicans and Methodists, and now we have 160 Ana chaplains or their equivalents in post across the country. And some of those are Anglicans, Methodists, Baptists, URC, Catholics, free evangelical churches, all sorts of different denominations are now involved. But the most important thing is that it is about good listening. It's about people paying attention to the person in front of them. These are basic sort of chaplaincy techniques, as I'm sure you're aware. And we go at the pace of the person who we're talking to and listening to. And if they don't want to talk about God, or they don't want to talk about religion or spirituality or anything very profound, that's absolutely fine. On the other hand, there are other people who are saying, do you know, I never get the chance to have any kind of meaningful conversation. If you imagine being in a care home, particularly at the moment when people are spending so much time in their own rooms on their own, somebody might come in and say, shall I change the water? Shall I empty your bin now? Shall I throw away the dead flowers? What do you want for lunch? What do you want for supper tomorrow evening? That's about the extent of the conversation. And people are starved of deep and meaningful conversations, or they just want a bit of light banter, but they want something that is on their terms. It's what they want rather than fitting into the regime, which I think we can all sympathize with. So it began 11 years ago. And here we are now with it nationally. and growing very, very fast.
That's amazing. So you've told us the impact on other people that you hope to have. I just wondered if you could tell us what motivated you to go there in the first place. Why did you decide to do something in this arena?
Well, as you've explained, I was a licensed lay minister or reader already, and I was really enjoying my ministry. And I'd spent 35 odd years in broadcasting, in print journalism first, and then broadcasting in radio and TV. And I was just beginning to think, do you know what? Maybe there's something else that I ought to be doing. Maybe I'm enjoying my ministry so much. Maybe there is another way of kind of living the next 10 to 15 years of my working life. And then I happened to see an advert in the diocesan e-newsletter for a chaplain to older people in Alton. And of course, Alton is only just up the road from where I live, not many miles away. And my first thought is, oh, how wonderful. Why aren't these everywhere? It seems such a good idea. My own parents had had quite a tough time in their older age. By then, sadly, they had both died. And I just thought, well, an Ana Chaplain or their equivalent would have been just what my mum and dad could have done with. Somebody outside the family to talk to. All of us carry baggage, and sometimes it's not appropriate or desirable to share that baggage with one's own children, or when one's own children aren't interested or the ability to chat to us in that way. And so ironically, it can often be somebody outside the family who is better equipped to help you deal with some of the issues that you may be grappling with. I'm just going to turn down my computer because I'm aware that otherwise you're going to hear every single message as it comes through with a diddly-dee, which is going to drive me mad. So I'm going to turn that down. Hopefully I can still hear you. So crack on.
So you are where you are now. I'm sure you had a plan when you started. Have you had to modify that I mean, apart from COVID, have you had to modify the vision as you've gone along, or has it stayed pretty much where it was?
Well, the vision at the outset, I honestly thought, Mark, that this was me winding down in my career. I'd worked jolly hard, raised 2 children while working full time, and I thought I could take my foot off the accelerator slightly. And what a nice the next decade or 15 years, as I say, just working on a small canvas, listening to people, hopefully helping them in some cases. And I thought that if we developed a good model in Alton, then somebody else would take it up and replicate it all over the country. I had absolutely no doubt that it was worth copying and that this ought to be available to everybody. So in my mind's eye, I thought this ought to be available. There ought to be Ana Chaplains in every small to medium-sized community in the country. But I never dreamt that it would fall to me to try and initiate that. And so for the first 4 years, I was just honing my chaplaincy skills, really, reading up everything I could about chaplaincy, becoming as good a listener as I possibly could be, selling the idea to the local community so that we could raise funds to keep this paid post going beyond my tenure there. And I was really enjoying it. But the thing was that more and more people came to my door or were emailing me saying, oh, could you come and talk to us about Ana Chaplaincy? And what's distinctive about this ministry among older people? And what are you achieving there? And how could we set up something similar where we are? And it dawned on me that I needed an infrastructure. I needed a website. I needed a way of people having their questions answered without me laboriously writing an email every time or going along to their parish hall and talking about it, because otherwise I'd have been run ragged. And that's really where the Bible Reading Fellowship came in. So BRF, the Bible Reading Fellowship, is nearly 100 years old. It'll be celebrating its centenary at the end of this year, beginning of next. And it began with a vicar in Brixton who decided that he wanted to get his parishioners to get a move on spiritually. So he developed some Bible reading notes. And as is often the way with the Church of England and indeed other denominations, there was sort of parish envy. Other people in other places said, oh, that's a good idea. Can we have a bit of that? And so these Bible reading notes grew and they became a publisher worldwide. And then they started incubating good grassroots church ideas. And the most famous of those is probably Messy Church, which most people have heard about. And indeed, we now, under our umbrella of Ana Chaplaincy within BRF, have something called Messy Vintage, which is Messy Church specifically for older people. And that comes under our jurisdiction, and you know, we're growing that across the country. But I was pushing at something of an open door, as often is the way with good God ideas. You know, this wasn't really my idea, this was God's idea all the time. And he had turned the soil very productively. So when I made this suggestion to BRF that they might like to take us under their wing and help us to develop this nationally, they were very enthusiastic. And to cut a long story short, in 2014, I joined them full-time, and another Ana chaplain was recruited to work locally. But I carried on doing some days a month, so many days a month, in order to keep my hand in, to keep at the coal face, if you like, to still be able to speak with authority about Ana chaplaincy and about the importance of better spiritual care for older people and their carers. And that's what Ana chaplaincy now is within BRF, and growing fast. There are now 160, as I say, of the Ana chaplains and their equivalents, because it's very important to realize that there are other people who've been doing this sort of work for years. This wasn't rocket science. This wasn't brand new. What was brand new about it was creating a kind of brand around it and enabling churches to sort of take an off-the-peg model and develop it with a little bit of tweaking for their own local context. And so there are people called ministers for older people, or pastor to the elderly, or director of older people's ministry, who to all intents and purposes are Ana chaplains. And so they are invited to join our network. But the vast majority, well over 100 or so, are chaplains within the network.
Great. So you did really well there, because you answered the question I was going to ask you next before I even asked it. So I was going to say, what about the Bible Reading Fellowship then? What's all that about? So you've done that. It's interesting, isn't it? So we've sort of gone on a bit of a parallel journey here in many ways, because, you know, I went to the Trust. Okay, it wasn't by my idea by any means, but I thought, well, you know, I could do a bit of something to help with this and one thing and another. and it's grabbed me in the same way that the chaplaincy grabbed you in, and we've enabled other people to do it. It's not like going and saying, I'm going to do this for you. It's enabled other people who've got those skills, you with the chaplaincy and us with the food banks, to actually do something in their own community themselves. And I think that always seems to me to be a really key part of these things, because you've already got the buy-in and you get the investment, don't you, then, of people. If it's just a case of helping them on their way, often it just makes the difference between, well, I really want to do this, but I don't know how to. And I've seen, you know, incredible things happen with us with that. So I'm sure you must have done it in the same way. So that's quite an interesting parallel for me.
It is, and it's been my greatest joy, actually, and I didn't expect this, but to see particularly older lay women themselves becoming Ana chaplains. So many of them were doing this sort of work, but in an unrecognised and unauthorised way. And what we've been doing really is raising the professional good standards in this whole field and enabling people to have a label and a title which then is recognised by their ministry team and by their local community, so that they're given that sort of authority to go into situations and know that they've got the backup. It isn't just, oh, it's Joan or it's Bob or it's Mary, you know, good old Mary doing this work. It's the fact that they are part of a professional network that is committed to continuing ministerial development, for want of a better expression, a better phrase, but it's about always improving one's skills, honing one's skills, so that we improve at what we do. And it's open to men or women, lay or ordained, but the vast majority are women, and they are lay women. And I think that's quite a powerful thing, particularly in this day and age. And it's good to see people discerning their own vocations to this work.
Yeah, so again, it's opening doors for people into places where they weren't sure that they could tread, and with a little bit of help, enables people just to take that step and move forward. It's interesting. We've sort of found that in the broadcast that we do. each day. So many more people have found out that actually it's quite not so scary standing up doing something in front of a screen as it might be in front of a whole church full of people. And we've gained so much from the number of people that now offer into what we do. And it's just having that ability to go from not knowing what to do to having a bit of help to do it.
Yes,
okay,
it's confidence boosting, isn't it?
Yes, it is, absolutely. So we talked about it, the theory of it, and what happens. But I thought it might be interesting for you to tell us a bit about, if you can, give us a bit of a story as to some of the people maybe you've met, or things that stick in your mind as to what it's done for people along the way. I was lucky. I managed to. I came out with you for a day a few years ago now, and we went around. And one of the people I met was Bob, who, for those of you that may read certain newspapers, Bob became the eldest man in England, was
in the world.
In the world. That's right, before he died.
At 112.
Yes, and I remember saying to Margaret when I opened the paper and saw that he died, I met Bob, and I met him with Debbie. I know you're probably not going to talk about him, but I just wanted, give us a flavour of some of the, the things that come out of this.
Well, just before we leave Bob, I was very honoured to take his funeral in the summer last year, and I really miss Bob still, because, to be honest, it's always a virtuous circle that's set up between the person you're listening to and yourself. But Bob really gave us much more than we ever gave him. He looked after our spiritual care. If ever I had a knotty problem, a real dilemma, I would go and see Bob and he'd pray with me, and I'd go away feeling lighter and clearer in my head about what to do next. And so this is very much about enabling older people to have a voice and speak into their communities so that they can be of benefit to their communities. This isn't just about younger people dispensing largesse to older people, far, far from it. Yes, a couple of stories spring to mind. The first concerns a single woman who, when I first met her, was working in a care home as a volunteer. She had profound deafness and still does suffer from severe deafness. And she was struggling with complex health issues, still living independently, but we visited her, and then she needed to move into what's called a close care apartment, so needed more help. And she was clearly a woman of faith. It was quite difficult to communicate with her, but when she moved into her new flat, she'd made it so beautiful. And we just had this idea as Ana Chaplaincy that it would be nice to bless her new accommodation. So I devised a little service of blessing, and we walked from room to room, not a very big flat, but the kitchen, the sitting room, her bedroom, the bathroom, and we blessed all the different areas. And it was a very, very meaningful little service. And I think it meant a great deal to her as well as to us. And since then, she's had quite a tough time, been in and out of hospital. And we've just continued to support her, and we've seen how her faith has developed. I hasten to add that Ana Chaplaincy is for people of strong faith, little faith, or no faith at all. So that's one story of someone's faith deepening. But another example I can give you is of a couple who were at one of the clubs in town where older people tend to gather, linked to disability. And they would help a great deal, very active, newly retired, very energetic. But over the decade, we've seen the curve go down, and very sadly, the husband became very ill. But he always had a soft spot for the Ana Chaplains, loved to chat to them. And I remember a conversation actually outside the church hall one day when he said, "Tell me about women priests. I think it's great that women are now entering the church in a more assertive way, in a more visible way, and leading from the front and things." And it was the first time we'd ever had what I'd call a God conversation, but that was his way in. And again, as he became ill, there were more and more opportunities to really talk about life and death, and to support his wife, who was obviously struggling with this new situation too. And then very sadly, he died. And we two Ana Chaplains actually shared the taking of his service. And since then, we've been supporting his widow. And obviously through COVID-19, this has been a very, very tough time to be bereaved. So I think we can really look at both that single woman and this couple, and latterly the widowed wife, to point to people who we've clearly had an impact on their life and continue to support them through the changed circumstances in their life.
Thank you. At the beginning, you mentioned COVID, and you said, you know, might talk about that a bit later. So how's that affected what you do?
Hugely. I mean, when we first went into lockdown, I'd just driven all the way back from Cumbria, where I'd been due to meet a lot of different people in different settings. And about half the people we were expecting turned up at each of the meetings. And we knew then that something was coming. Clearly we weren't aware of the magnitude of it. But there was a need for people who were susceptible to illness to remain behind closed doors rather than coming out to a public meeting. And indeed, you know, I came home and that was it. We were locked down. And my first thought is, what are we going to do about the care homes? How are we going to get to people? And of course, very stringent bans on visiting were imposed. And, you know, we all sat back on our haunches and thought, well, how do we operate as Ana Chaplains now? This is impossible. But of course, you know, human ingenuity being what it is, we have found ways around it. And part of what I do now is blog. I blog several times a week. I Facebook post stories as well. And what we've been doing really is publicising how the network is getting round the difficulties and still managing to support people. Obviously, you can send cards and letters, you can email in some situations, you can telephone people, you can operate telephone befriending schemes, you can send in CDs of services pre-recorded, you can Skype services, you can do what we're doing now with a care home with several people brought into the lounge, and you can still hold a service of the word. There are ways of still doing it, but nothing beats sitting down face to face with someone. That has to be admitted. But just this very morning, I've just posted a blog about a woman called Pam Shaw, who is our latest Ana Chaplain recruit, and her church, St. Margaret's Church in Lowestoft, has recognised her ability to connect with older people. And bear in mind, she's 82 herself, very spry, very energetic. And she's managed to get back into her care home where she was visiting regularly before. It's called Broadlands. And the other day, she writes about how she donned full PPE, an apron right down to the ground, you know, the mask, the works, the gloves, and she's been allowed in. And she was ushered into a room and she thought, well, who's going to want to come and have a conversation with me when I look like this? And to her amazement and delight, there were 7 people sitting there waiting to have a conversation with her, all of whom said they'd love to see her again next week. Right. So it is possible to get back into care homes. And Pam, who's brand new to the network, but of course not to this work, because as I've explained, many people have been doing this for years, but haven't had a title. She's now the Ana Chaplain for older people in Lowestoft. She's rooted in her community, and bless her, she's one of the first people who's managed to get back into care homes doing her chaplaincy. Some have been able to offer end-of-life care as Ana Chaplains, because that is allowed and permitted. But her home is, she says, very efficiently run, and they are confident that she can visit without being a health risk to any of the residents. And I think this is the beginning of seeing other care homes saying, well, if she can do it, I think we can make arrangements to allow our Ana Chaplains back in, which would be marvellous news.
Yeah, that's great, because that's a real message of hope, isn't it? That, you know, we will move through all this and life will come back in some form. Debbie, thank you. It's been amazing. I want to ask you one more question. You've been gracious enough to spend the time with us today. If people are interested, what could we do to help you?
Well, just drop us an email. I mean, there are several things. You could donate, of course. I mean, we don't get any government funding, so it's always helpful to have a cash donation. You could pray for this ministry, because I'm absolutely certain that I was able to push at doors that then swung open because people have been praying for this sort of work to be done. So that's really important. But if you wanted to know more about how to develop an Ana Chaplaincy where you are, or you're listening thinking, oh, I'd love to do work like that. I wonder if I could get some training and do this work? Yes, you can, is the answer. And we'd be delighted if you dropped us a line. Go to our website and have a read and see the links which enable you to get in touch with us. It's anachaplaincy.org.uk. Ana Chaplaincy is all one word. And by the way, it's called Ana Chaplaincy because it's named after the woman who appears with Simeon in Luke's Gospel. So both of them, good role models of faithful older people. It does come from a Christian motivation, but as I say, it's for everybody. And it's very definitely for carers as well as for older people themselves. So that's the way to get in touch. And to have your support would be brilliant. Even better it would be to see more Ana chaplains, because I really, really do have this vision that one day there will be an Ana chaplain in every small to medium-sized community right across the country. That would be brilliant.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Look, thank you again for spending the time. It's been really interesting to catch up, to hear more about what you're doing. And I'm sure there'll be people out there that have an interest. And yes, let's hope that we can do something positive to help you. So thank you.
Brilliant. That would be great. Thank you so much, Mark, and greetings to everyone watching and listening. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.